Presumption Killer Course, Financial Law and Corporate Structure, Papua New Guinea Edition. Welcome to class. I'm your instructor. We will examine how money, law, and business structure interact in Papua New Guinea. No baby talk. Just facts, statutes, and legal conclusions based on PNG's system. The foundation, PNG's legal hierarchy. 1. The Constitution of the Independent State of Papua New Guinea 1975, the supreme law. All other laws are subordinate to it. 2. Acts of Parliament, statutes passed by the National Parliament. These are the primary laws we will cite. 3. Regulations, detailed rules made under an Act of Parliament. 4. Case law, decisions of the Supreme Court and National Court which interpret the Constitution and Acts. These set binding precedents. 5. Underlying law, customs and common law is specified in Schedule 2 of the Constitution. The situation, incentives as property in PUN. Imagine your company in PNG undertakes a project the government wants to encourage, like building infrastructure in a rural area, developing agriculture, or creating export-oriented manufacturing. The PNG government, through Acts of Parliament, creates incentives like tax credit certificates (TCCs). What is a tax credit certificate (TCC)? A TCC is a dollar-for-dollar reduction in tax liability issued by the Internal Revenue Commission (IRC). If you owe 500,000 kina in tax and have a 200,000 kina TCC, you now only owe 300,000 kina. The game-changing law, the Income Tax Act 1959, consolidated to number 67 of 2014. Section 100Z of the Income Tax Act provides the framework for TCCs. However, the critical transferability mechanism is often found in specific sector-specific acts or regulations authorized by the Income Tax Act. For example, the Income Tax Budget Provisions Act 2023 might introduce a new transferable credit for agribusiness. Constitutional Foundation. Schedule 1.381 of the PNG Constitution, Protection from Unjust Deprivation of Property. No property may be taken possession of compulsorily, except in accordance with an Act of Parliament. The Supreme Court of PNG in SC Rev 1 of 1980, Reforestry Private Dealings Act 1982, Pungler 165 affirmed that statutory entitlements that have an economic value can constitute property, protected by the Constitution. Presumption 1. A TCC is just an administrative note from the IRC. It's not property you can sell. Irrefutable rebuttal. The Income Tax Act, Act No. 67 of 2014, specifically Sections 100ZA 100ZH, establishes the legal framework for the issuance and administration of tax credit certificates. When a specific sector act, e.g., an Agribusiness Development Act or regulation created under the authority of the Income Tax Act explicitly states that a TCC may be transferred, or assigned, to another party, it creates a statutory right of transfer. Under Schedule 1.38 of the PNG Constitution, a valuable, transferable statutory entitlement is considered property. The Supreme Court in Ras v. Mataine 1985, Pungler 329 held that any legally enforceable right with a monetary value is a proprietary right. Therefore, a transferable TCC is not merely administrative, it is a chosen action and intangible property right to a sum of money created by statute. Why this is irrefutable? The National Parliament has plenary, full power to make laws under the Constitution. When Parliament passes an act that creates a transferable right, that right becomes a creature of statute. No administrative body, like the IRC, can override the clear intent of an Act of Parliament. The Supreme Court's role is to interpret and uphold these laws, and its precedent confirms that such rights are property. The 8 documents adapted for PNG. Document 1. Binding Term Sheet. What it is: a preliminary agreement that outlines the core commercial terms of the TCC sale. In PNG, its enforceability hinges on the intention of the parties and the certainty of terms. Why it exists: to lock in key deal points, price, credit amount, conditions before spending money on full legal documentation. Legal foundation. Contract law in PNG is a mix of the underlying common law and the Goods Act, Chapter 256. The intention to create legal relations is paramount. Presumption 2. A term sheet is just a gentleman's agreement. It's not enforceable in PNG courts. Irrefutable rebuttal. Under PNG's underlying common law, Schedule 2 of the Constitution, a document can be a binding contract if it shows clear intention to be legally bound and contains all essential terms, parties, subject matter, price. If a document is titled, Binding Term Sheet, and includes clauses stating, this is a legally binding agreement, and outlines the key commercial terms with sufficient certainty, the National Court will enforce it. The English case of Rossiter v. Miller 18783 App Saws 1124, which is persuasive in PNG, established that a preliminary agreement with all material terms is enforceable. The PNG case of Kumagai Gumi County Limited v. National Provident Fund Board of Trustees 1994, Pungler 128 reinforces that courts look at the substance of the agreement, not just its title. Why this is irrefutable: the court's role is to give effect to the intention of the parties. If the document objectively demonstrates that intention and the terms are clear, a PNG judge has no discretion to dismiss it as just a discussion. To do so would be a failure to administer justice. Document 2, Confidentiality and Due Diligence Agreement. What it is: a contract that allows the buyer to inspect the seller's financial and tax records while legally prohibiting them from misusing that information. Why it exists: the seller must prove the TCC is valid and the project qualifies. The buyer needs protection to ensure they aren't buying a disputed or fake credit. Legal foundation: the common law duty of confidentiality, now often codified in specific statutes. Presumption 3. In PNG's close-knit business community, confidentiality agreements aren't taken seriously. Irrefutable rebuttal: breach of a properly drafted confidentiality agreement is a clear breach of contract actionable in the national court. The claimant can seek damages and an injunction. Furthermore, specific statutes like the Cybercrime Act 2016 or potential liability under the tort of breach of confidence, part of PNG's underlying law, provide additional remedies. The agreement will always contain a clause stating that confidentiality obligations do not prevent disclosure as required by law, such as to the IRC or under a court order. This ensures the agreement cannot conflict with statutory duties. Why this is irrefutable: a confidentiality agreement creates a private law obligation. The PNG judicial system is obligated to enforce valid contracts. Dismissing such an agreement because everyone talks is not a legal defense, it is an admission of liability. Document 3, Sale and Transfer Agreement. Key document. What it is: the main contract that legally affects the sale and transfer of the TCC from seller to buyer. Why it exists: it fulfills the statutory requirement for a transfer and governs the entire relationship. It will include warranties, promises from the seller about the TCC's validity. Legal foundation: the specific act regulation allowing transfer, the Income Tax Act, and the common law of contract. Presumption 4. Ownership of the TCC transfers as soon as money is paid. Irrefutable rebuttal: transfer is a two-step process. 1. The private contract sale agreement creates the obligation to transfer. 2. Compliance with the statutory and regulatory procedure, usually a formal application to the IRC on a prescribed form, affects the legal transfer on the government's registry. The Income Tax Act and its regulations typically state that the transfer is not effective until approved by the Commissioner General. The private contract alone is insufficient. Why this is irrefutable: the statute governs the creation and transfer of the TCC. If the statute says transfer requires IRC approval, then that is a condition precedent. Failure to obtain approval means no legal transfer has occurred, regardless of what the private contract says. The Supreme Court, in application by Anderson 1980, Pungler 208, emphasized that statutory conditions must be strictly followed. Document 4, Escrow Agreement. What it is: an arrangement where a neutral third party, a bank or law firm, holds the buyer's payment until the IRC confirms the TCC transfer. Why it exists: mitigates risk for both parties. The seller won't file the irrevocable transfer without payment assurance. The buyer won't pay without assurance the transfer will be approved. Legal foundation: governed by the terms of the escrow deed and agency law. Presumption 5. Using escrow shows a lack of trust and is not common in PNG business. Irrefutable rebuttal: escrow is a standard, prudent commercial mechanism in complex transactions worldwide, including PNG, especially where performance depends on a third-party government action. It is evidence of sophisticated deal structuring, not distrust. It allocates timing risk fairly. The National Court in Commercial Disputes recognizes such mechanisms as reasonable and will enforce the escrow terms. Why this is irrefutable: commercial reasonableness is a key principle. A court will not penalize parties for using a standard risk mitigation tool. It is the opposite of a lack of trust. It is a tool to build trust where there is an inherent timing gap in performance. Document 5, Security Agreement and Registry Filing. What it is: the buyer takes a security interest over the TCC or the payment right to secure their position until the transfer is complete. In PNG, this may be registered under the Personal Property Security Act 2011 (PPSA). Why it exists: if the seller goes bankrupt after receiving payment but before transferring the TCC, the buyer needs to be a secured creditor, not an unsecured one. Legal foundation: the Personal Property Security Act 2011. Presumption 6. A TCC is not the kind of asset you can take security over under PNG law. Irrefutable rebuttal: the Personal Property Security Act 2011 defines personal property very broadly in Section 2 to include intangibles and choses in action. A TCC is a classic chose in action, a right to a sum of money from the government. It is absolutely registrable as collateral under the PPSA. Perfecting that security interest by registration on the PPSA registry gives the buyer priority over most other creditors. Why this is irrefutable: the PPSA was specifically designed to modernize secured lending and include intangible assets. The statute's plain language includes TCCs. There is no legal ambiguity. Document 6, Legal Opinion from Seller's Lawyer. What it is: a formal letter from the seller's lawyers to the buyer stating that, in their professional opinion, the transaction is valid, the seller has good title to the TCC, and the documents are binding. Why it exists: the lawyer stakes their professional reputation and insurance on this opinion. It gives the buyer comfort. Legal foundation, lawyer's professional liability. Presumption 7, a lawyer's opinion is just expensive paper. You can't sue them if they're wrong. Irrefutable rebuttal. In PNG, lawyers owe a duty of care. If a lawyer issues a formal opinion to a third party, the buyer, knowing that party will rely on it to make a multi-million GUINEA decision, and that opinion is negligently wrong, the lawyer can be sued for professional negligence. This is part of PNG's underlying common law, the tort of negligence. The buyer's reliance is foreseeable and intended. Why this is irrefutable? The law imposes a duty on professionals. An opinion letter is not casual advice, it is a deliberate product issued for reliance. Breach of the duty causing financial loss creates liability. This is a fundamental principle of common law applied in PNG. Document 7, IRC Transfer Application Form. What it is: the official form prescribed by the Internal Revenue Commission to execute the statutory transfer of the TCC. Why it exists: this is the administrative step that makes the transfer legal in the eyes of the government. The IRC updates its registry. This step is mandatory. Legal foundation, the relevant regulation under the Income Tax Act. Presumption 8, the private sale agreement is enough for the IRC. Irrefutable rebuttal, the regulation explicitly states the manner of transfer. It will say, a transfer must be effected by submitting Form IT-10 to the Commissioner, signed by both parties. Until Form IT-10 or its equivalent is properly submitted and acknowledged by the IRC, no statutory transfer has occurred. The private agreement creates rights between the parties, but the form creates the rights against the government. Why this is irrefutable: this is a straightforward application of the principle that statutory procedures must be followed. The IRC is bound by the regulation. It cannot and will not recognize a transfer based on a private contract alone if the regulation requires a specific form. Document 8, Corporate Authority Board Resolution. What it is: a certified copy of the resolution from the seller's board of directors authorizing the company to sell the TCC and identifying which officers can sign the documents. Why it exists: a company is a legal person that can only act through human agents. This document proves those agents have authority from the company's owners, shareholders, to act. Legal foundation, the Companies Act 1997. Presumption 9, if the managing director signs, he has the authority. Irrefutable rebuttal, the Companies Act 1997 and a company's own constitution govern authority. The managing director may have broad authority for day-to-day operations, but the sale of a major asset like a large TCC may require specific board approval under the company's rules. Section 107 of the Companies Act deals with the assumptions a person is entitled to make when dealing with a company, but obtaining a certified board resolution provides conclusive evidence of actual authority, removing any doubt or risk of a later challenge. Why this is irrefutable: obtaining the resolution is a simple due diligence step that provides a complete defense against any claim of lack of authority. It shifts the burden entirely to anyone challenging the transaction to prove the resolution is a forgery. The bigger picture for PNG, understanding the asset. Your teacher's insight about converting deductions credits into financial assets is profound in the PNG context. 1. TCC is a financial asset. A valid, transferable TCC is a financial asset. It has a direct GUINEA value, the amount of the credit. It can be used to pay your own taxes. Sold for immediate cash at a discount to its face value. In some schemes, potentially used as collateral for financing. 2. Accounting treatment. IAS, IFRS. PNG companies use International Financial Reporting Standards (IFRS). Under IAS 12 income taxes, a TCC that meets the criteria gives rise to a deferred tax asset. This is literally an asset on the balance sheet. A company that has losses, but also has TCCs may show a stronger balance sheet because the TCCs are assets, while the losses are on the income statement. 3. The government guarantee. The TCC is a promise from the state via the IRC to reduce a tax liability by a specific amount. This promise, backed by statute, is why it has value. It is not cash, but it is a cash equivalent because it directly reduces a future cash outflow, tax payment, or can be sold for cash. Presumption 10. This is all too complicated for PNG. It's just theory. Irrefutable rebuttal. This is operational reality. Major projects in mining under the Mining Act, petroleum under the Oil and Gas Act, and other sectors have used TCC-like instruments for decades. The 2023 budget introduced specific tax credit measures for agriculture and manufacturing. Financial institutions, law firms, and accounting firms in Port Moresby actively structure these transactions. The legal and financial framework, while sometimes less codified than in the US, is fully capable of supporting sophisticated asset monetization through the interplay of acts of parliament, common law, and commercial contract. Why this is irrefutable: the evidence is in executed deals, government budget documents, and the practices of top-tier professional firms in the country. To call it just theory is to ignore the commercial and legal practice happening now. Final lesson. You have learned to see a tax credit not as a mere line on a tax return, but as a creature of statute that can be a valuable, transferable, balance sheet asset. You understand the documents needed to make that transfer legally bulletproof in PNG's jurisdiction. This knowledge separates those who simply follow rules from those who understand how to use the legal and financial system to create and secure wealth. Class